In this video, we're going to take a look at communication between services using an asynchronous communication style. We're going to take a look at two different ways of using async communication. The first way that we're going to look at in this video in particular is not going to be super great. It's going to have some really big downsides. And in the next video, we're going to take a look at the second way of using asynchronous communication. So let's get to it. In this video, method number one, not so great, but you need to know it anyways. Okay, so the general idea between asynchronous communication is that we're going to introduce something into our entire application that is accessible from all these different services. We refer to this thing as an event bus. The goal of this event bus is to handle little notifications or events being emitted from our different services. These different notifications or events are like little objects you can imagine, like little notes that describe something that has happened or something that needs to happen inside of our overall application. Each service is going to connect to this event bus. Once it is connected, each service can either emit events or receive events from the event bus. Now, one thing you might notice right away is that we've got all of our services wired up to one common thing right here, which means that we've got a single point of failure. So whenever we deploy an event bus, we usually go through a decent amount of effort to make sure that this thing is relatively resilient and is not going to crash all the time and therefore restrict communication between our services. Let's start to walk through an actual example of how we can use an event bus and emit events to solve this issue around Service D. Okay, so we're going to imagine that Service D receives a request asking to see all the products that have been ordered by a particular user. Service D needs information from services A, B, and C to complete this request. So the first thing that Service D will do is emit an event. So this is an event right here. An event might have some type that describes what kind of event is occurring, and it might have some data or contextual information associated with it as well. So in this case, we might imagine that the type is something like user query, and the data might be the ID of the user that we want to look up. As a reminder, we're trying to make sure that whenever someone asks for information about a particular user, we're going to make sure that that user actually exists first. So this event would flow on over to this event bus. The event bus can automatically handle incoming events and route them off to different services that might be able to handle that event. So in this case, we might be able to configure our event bus to send a copy of this event over to Service A. And so we can imagine that this event is going to flow over like so. Then inside of Service A, we would have some code to be executed anytime this event comes in. So Service A might see this event come in. It might say, oh, someone's trying to look up some information about a user. So Service A could then look up information about the user with ID number 1. And then to respond or get some information back over to Service D, Service A could emit a new event. So it could emit an event over to the event bus, and maybe it would be an event with a type of something like user query result, and then the data could be the actual information about this user. So maybe their ID and a name of Jill and whatever else. So this event would flow into our event bus, and the event bus, we could configure it so that it will send an event of type user query result automatically back over to Service D. So we'll go back over to Service D, and we'll have some code inside of Service D to receive an event of type user query result and do some processing on it. You can then kind of imagine that we would repeat the same exact process to take a look at all the different orders that this user has created, and then retrieve details about all the different products associated with those orders as well from Service B. So that is one possible way of doing asynchronous communication using events. Now, I want to repeat again right away that you're not really going to see this used terribly often in the wild, and there's a very good reason for that. The reason is, it basically shares all the downsides of synchronous communication, but it has additional downsides associated with it. So first off, I would say that this is conceptually not super easy to understand. Service D doesn't need a database, yeah, that's still true. But with this style of asynchronous communication, we still have a dependency between services. If any of these events fails to be processed, the overall request is going to fail or probably time out. We still can only get a request or a response back to the original request as quickly as the slowest event. And once again, we can easily be introducing a web of different events being emitted. So this style of asynchronous communication, not the best thing in the world. But again, you still need to know that this exists. Okay, so that really just leaves us with one last option. Remember, just a moment ago, I told you that there were two possibilities of using asynchronous communication to solve the issue that we're in right now. So let's take another pause right here. We'll come back to the next video and we'll take a look at the second form of asynchronous communication that we're going to use.